As you could hear, the sound in the previous podcast is very clear, but there is a background hiss. It's very warm. June 9th, monsoon has not arrived in Mumbai yet, and the onset is supposed to have happened, but rainfall remains very weak. So it's hot. So I turned up the fan, but it made that background noise. So I have reduced it and I'm sweating, but that's the price I pay for giving you these podcasts. I hope you enjoy them. Okay, so let's look at little more about behavioral tendencies of humans and see what kind of questions arise out of those. I've just picked these from the book itself. For example, can specific behavioral tendencies or advances be used as hallmarks of one hominin type or one population? So we'll come to this issue of how speciation of our own lineage, not even our relatives in terms of Australopithecines and Erdipithecines and Kenyanthropus and so on, but just Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Devonians, Floresiensis, Neanderthals, and Sapiens. What are the behavioral differences? Were there any differences? Were they related to any specific advances in behavior along the way? Are behavioral changes associated with cognitive shifts? Does cognitive ability go up with behavioral change? Or is cognitive shift associated with behavioral change? Are those behavioral, cognitive, or biological shifts rapid or gradual? So saltations or gradualism? This is still a question. Are they mutually exclusive, mutually dependent, or independent? So behavioral, cognitive, and biological shifts, are they happening together independently, or does one happen and then there is a ability that is hidden and gets expressed when some change happens, like the brain gets bigger and our ability to compute goes up, not because we didn't have it before, but that a bigger cranium somehow allowed some hidden potential to come out. So I'm just giving it as an example, but you can think of many such things. Are they similar in all regions of the world? So we'll, especially next chapter, we will come to Diaspora of the Homo lineages, and of course we'll have to keep coming back to the question of whether that was climate driven or not, which we'll address a little bit here and then more come back to it more later on. So in that sense, if different Homo lineages colonize different parts of the globe, especially Asia and Europe, was there geographical dependence or climate-driven geographical differences in the behavioral tendencies or advances? Are they associated with migrations, dispersals, interactions, and or extinctions of population? For example, were the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, sapiens and Neanderthals, were they communicating? Did they have a language? Were they, of course, they were interbreeding by all knowledge that we have now, especially genetic evidences. So did those interactions just lead to wars and conflicts, or was there mutual beneficial behavioral tendencies and advances emanating from those, including exchange of languages, for example? Are they correlated with climate and shifts in nature or availability of resources? So where do the stressors for forcing mutations in behavior may come from? Would they have come from climate or shifts in the nature or availability of resources, like extinction of certain species, migration of certain species, changes in vegetation types, and so on? So directly climate driven or indirectly climate driven, or some other resource limitation like overuse of water or anything else. Okay, so So these are all questions that are not easily addressed, but we should be aware that these are the questions that are critical. So just to revisit, we mentioned mitochondrial DNA before. So these are the things that are used to go back up the lineages to look for common connections. So I just wanted to mention that again in this context. So nuclear DNA is generally inherited from all ancestors. So as offsprings are produced by different couples, and they couple with each other and they produce offspring, you are transmitting 50% of the genes from each parent along the way. And when you stand here, you have carried genetic imprints of many generations from the past. Whereas the advantage of mitochondrial DNA is that it is mostly inherited from a single lineage. So I'm saying mostly because now there is evidence that some contribution may come from from a father as well. In general, the matrilineal inheritance of mitochondrial DNA. Remember, mitochondria is a good example of endosymbiosis, where one cell colonizes another cell. So each cell has a mitochondrion, but it carries its own DNA because it's been assimilated endosymbiotically at some point. We still carry many viruses and bacteria within us, many of them very beneficial to us. Gut microbiome, for example, is discussed in great detail about how it can affect health, including mental health. So anyway, if there is a single lineage that is being carried along by mitochondrial DNA, then it's easier to go back following mitochondrial DNA in time, like a molecular clock, where of course there are assumptions of mutation rates and so on. So I don't want to casually mention that word, but you can go back to see how different speciations and lineages may be related through these matrilineal or inheritance from mother to the mitochondrial DNA. So it's a powerful technique, but always there are caveats, of course. Okay, so the other thing that we do is put together all the evidences which keep emerging even as we go forward and look at the timeline. So here is the early hominins and their tools. Does this relate somehow to brain size, intelligence, expertise, cooperation, learning and teaching, and whether that will also somehow indicates how the upbringing of children, how long they were associated with parents before they became independent and went off on their own, and so on, may be related to what we find in terms of tools. So if we go to 2.5 million years ago, the Oldowan first stone tools from the Ethiopian River Valley, things like hammerstones, anvils, bones with hammer and cut marks. So even the materials used are different, may correspond to availability and expertise to use them, but sometimes dating also gets affected by these, because bones and stones and other things that are dated can lead to some differences in the dating as well. So one has to be clear about that. So Pliocene, Pleistocene, climate change is a big impact in terms of the argued evolution of bipedalism, which we have mentioned before, in terms of Australia and New Guinea moving north, blocking the pathway between the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, and changing the El Nino character in the Pacific. If you don't know what El Nino is, you can look up my other podcasts. And also changing the climate over East Africa, making it from a lush green forest into savannas and grasslands, which presumably changed behavior in terms of having to walk or run faster and further, and leading to bipedalism, standing upright, leading to changes in the spine and cranium connection and growth of the cranium, maybe along with that mastering fire, eating cooked food, changing the gut size, changing the jaw muscles, which also help the cranium grow, and then the brain can grow and take more energy, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm telling this as a story because mostly it is a narrative. So if you come more towards Homo Ergastra, living by the lake of Turkana, which is a hotspot for studying these things, and then you have along the way Homo erectus, earliest Homo erectus, so Dmanisi, Georgia, and Java are the places where these are found. Homo heidelbergensis, which typically is the origin of many speciations later on. So you come forward 1.6 million years down towards more recent times, 300,000 years, and so on. So Acheulean industrial complex, large cutting tools, teardrop shaped two-sided hand axes, cleavers, fire use evident at Swartkrans cave in Africa, stone tools in China. So this tells you that there was already a migration out of Africa, or separate evolutions of the Homo erectus line starting early on here and later on here, indicating the presence of Homo erectus. Bose Basin in China, Acheulean-like tools without the teardrop-shaped hand axe. So you can see that morphology of the tools are being used to guess the expertise, use of opposable thumbs and materials and so on. So obviously a lot of interpretation is involved. Although one disappears here, no Acheulean in Europe after about 500,000 years ago. Level was coring technique appears within the Acheulean, again indicating some advances in expertise. Javelin-like spears in Schöningen, Germany. So what makes us human? Some people would argue that these sharp tools and their ability to collect audio-visual information and throw spheres, we can throw much further than anybody else, even though monkeys and chimpanzees and other animals throw as well. And there are many frogs and so on that also can spit and aim to catch their prey. So it's not necessarily very unique, but the ability is maybe quite unique. So Acheulean ends here, beginning of the Middle Paleolithic and Middle Stone Age, Sub-Saharan Africa. So the large cutting tools are replaced with smaller tools, maybe more precise. Level was and radial core technologies and hafted composite tools and so on begin to appear. So how do we use these to relate to anatomical changes, genetic changes, behavioral changes? Anatomic changes in the sense of, let's say, a bodybuilder building more muscles to be able to run faster, catch prey, or keep a team together to hunt big game, and so on and so forth. So development of behavior, genetic, anatomical changes, developmental changes, and so on, not always completely filled in terms of the gaps here in time and in expertise and in the tool morphologies, manufacturing abilities, accuracies, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the other part is related to Neanderthal and modern human timeline that I'll come back to a little bit later on, but we'll come back and look at what else may make us unique or different. Is it the brain size, for example? So we'll visit some of those issues as well. Hopefully the sound has been reduced in this podcast, and I'll check and make sure as well. Okay.